What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the E-Full or Explicit podcast. Today, I have my good friend, and for a third time by himself, and I think a fourth or fifth time, technically on the podcast, Economist Antony Davies. Me and Anthony talk a lot about the Ukraine and Russia conflict. We talk about economics, how it's going to affect those countries, affect our country. We talk about gas prices. We talk about everything economically that you would like to know about when it comes to countries at war, right? So we have an invasion going on from Russia into Ukraine, a lot of conflict there. I was curious of how that's going to affect us here at home, considering we do a lot with Russia when it comes to oil and other economics, as well as the rest of the world. So this one is a doozy. My boy Anthony comes through again, like he always does, dropping some dimes about economics and how it's going to affect your pockets. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you click that bell notification so you get notified every single time my face comes on the screen or in your ears, however you're listening or watching. And enjoy this episode with economist Antony Davies on the E-Full or Explicit podcast. We'll see you next time. Peace out. This episode of the E-Full or Explicit podcast is brought to you by Bravo Concealment. Bravo Concealment is known for some of the best high quality and concealable holsters on the market. Located in the great state of Texas, they offer free shipping and unlimited lifetime warranty on all of their products, and a 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't like the product. I've been using Bravo Concealment for my gun holsters ever since I got into guns, and the quality is by far, bar none, the top notch in the entire industry that I've seen. And right now they're doing a buy one, get one free, plus free shipping, the 30-day money-back guarantee, and a lifetime warranty. On top of that, you, my friends, will get 10% off of any product, of any purchase on their website by using Explicit 10. Use the code Explicit10 and you'll get 10% off your entire purchase from bravoconcealment.com. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the E-Full or Explicit podcast. I'm Corey, and today we have, for now, I think, the third time by yourself, second time that you've done two with James Harrigan. So really, this is your fifth time on. Thank you.
I'm much more interesting without James.
Oh yeah. This is no. Well, I'll let you make fun of James. I'm not gonna go there. But Antony Davies, economist, thank you again for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Corey.
Absolutely. If you can just give everybody a quick synopsis of your background and stuff like that, that would be great.
I'm Antony Davies, Associate Professor of Economics at Duquesne University and the Milton Friedman Distinguished Fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education. That's lots of words to remember.
I was gonna say, that's a mouthful.
I'm co-host of the podcast Words and Numbers.
With James Harrigan.
With James Harrigan, yes.
So all of you watching and listening, if you want to go back and watch or listen to any of the episodes that me and Anthony have done, or me, him, and James have done, they are fantastic. Talk a lot about politics, economics, and just kind of like policy a lot. They're both insane with that kind of stuff. I'm just an idiot just asking questions. So once again, thank you, Anthony, for coming on. And today I really want to focus our conversation with what's going on in the world, mainly with Ukraine and Russia and other possible conflicts. I know you're not going to have a lot of data on a lot of those things, but I would love to hear your opinion on some of those things. But a lot of the questions I have geared towards today's conversation are going to be kind of, if they are economic related, they're going to be kind of home base, what's happening in the United States. There's a couple questions that I got from people that they ask me to ask you, which is great, which I haven't done yet before, because I typically just kind of go on with the conversation and what happens. But I asked a couple people to ask me some questions. But first off, give me your thoughts on what is happening right now in Russia and in Ukraine and stuff like that. Just whether it's personal or data driven, I don't know. What are your thoughts on what's happening right now?
Yeah, I don't have much of interest to say about the political side of it. My guess is as good as anybody else's there. But I think there's something fascinating going on that people aren't talking enough about. And that is, this thought comes from the fact that people have asked me before, do I think that this is, the prelude to World War III? And you have, so many parallels with, this dictator invading other countries for no apparent reason. But I think the parallels stop there. There is a huge difference between what's going on right now and what precipitated World Wars One and Two. And that huge difference is the response of the rest of the world. We haven't responded, we, the rest of the world, have not responded militarily. We've responded economically. We've imposed some sanctions, and by sanctions, we've in a lot of ways done unprecedented sanctions of not only are we not buying exports from Russia or selling to them, but all the other major countries have joined in, and we've effectively frozen them financially from the rest of the world. So they've been isolated both in terms of goods and services and in terms of finances. That's unprecedented, and by that what I mean is, for the rest of the world, for the world at large, to take such steps non-militarily is astounding. It's as if the human race has finally learned, look, there's a better way to deal with rogues like Putin. And is it painful for us? Sure it is. We're paying through the nose for gasoline, and this is particularly hard on the poor. But in total, the cost to us of waging this economic response is going to be a fraction of a percent of what the cost would have been to wage a military response.
Man, that's fucking great. That's such a good perspective, because I just talked to Don Mann, who's a former Navy SEAL, and his side of things, and he's a military guy. He's SEAL Team 6. So his perspective was completely different. His was, we need to react and we need to do something about it, and just basically remove Putin. That scared me. Me and him had a great conversation about that, because China, Iran, Russia, there's just certain countries that if you go to war with them, it's bad for everybody, not just our country and theirs, right? So the fact that you're looking at it as an economic way of thinking, obviously you're an economist, but I like that, and I haven't thought about that yet. I know the sanctions are there, but I don't know the details of them. So maybe you can kind of unpack a little bit of those and kind of like talk about the unprecedented ones that they're speaking of.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I would put under the category of unprecedented.
Okay.
One is that you have pretty much all the countries of the world, or all the major countries, with perhaps the exception of China, coming together and saying, yeah, we're going to impose economic sanctions. So we're not going to buy, we're not going to sell from Russia. And that's, of course, painful on our part, because Russia has things that we need. 5% of the world's oil consumption comes from Russia exporting oil. God. So right there's a big hit. They're major exporters of other things, grain and metals and woods, these sorts of things. So it hurts on our end, but it also hurts on their end, because they can't buy things that they need. That imposes hardship on them. Also, it makes it harder for them to get hold of things that they need to run their war machine. So that's one thing. There's the coming together of so many countries in these economic sanctions. The other thing is the style of sanction. It's not just goods and services, it's financial markets. So the Russians have had their foreign banks, foreign accounts frozen. There's no movement of money back and forth through Russia, which now makes it, in effect, isolates the ruble. This is why you're seeing the ruble decline so far in value, because prior to this, if I had rubles, I could exchange them for dollars or for yen or for euros or what have you. And so the euros were valuable to me, not just in that I could buy something in Russia in the rubles, but I could also convert to these other currencies. Well, now that's been shut off. So now a huge chunk of the value that exists in holding rubles is gone, and so you see the value of the ruble decline.
Saw that.
And this, of course, imposes more problems. And so, shouldn't rejoice in other people's problems. I was having a conversation with somebody about this today, and they were saying, well, look, this is imposing hardship on innocent Russians, it's imposing hardship on us, and all of that is correct. But the right question here is not what course of action would impose no hardship, because the hardship isn't coming from our responses, it's coming from the invasion of Ukraine.
Right.
The right question in front of us is what imposes the least harm. And by far, there's less harm imposed with the economic sanctions than there is with military response.
Right. Yeah. No, that's, I just wrote something down, kind of like death over dollars. Like when someone complains about, I hear it all the time. Oh, well, the gas prices are high. This is high. That's high. A buddy of mine last night bought a gallon of milk. It was like $6, which is insane. But it's also like, I'd rather do that than send 18 to 30-year-old people over to another country that is in wage war. We literally just got out of one. Excuse me. And I think that it's a smarter route. My question to you is, I don't know if you would know this or not, but with those sanctions and stuff like that we've done, are those kind of like acts of war, or would that eventually kind of force someone like Russia and Putin, because you back him into a corner financially, he's very wealthy himself. But if you start taking away all those things that are going in and out of Russia, like you said, he's not going to be able to feed that war machine and kind of get back the Soviet Union, because it seems to be what he wants to do as an end goal. Would that maybe possibly also go into a world war where we have to defend ourselves because we're financially crippling them?
Well, I don't know. A lot of that answer comes from what will Putin's response be, but I think his response gets muted in a way here. If, for example, we imposed only sanctions that involve goods and services, that's going to hurt principally. Of course, it hurts the war machine, but it hurts also the Russian people. They find it difficult to get the things they need to
Right.
survive. Imposing the financial sanctions, on the other hand, and that will hurt the working class people, but importantly, it's going to seriously hurt the oligarchs,
Mm-hmm.
the people that Putin has surrounded himself with, the rich people who may not wield official authority like he does, but do wield power.
Right.
And so, imagine in the United States if something happened that caused simultaneously Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and name others
Right.
to lose 90% of their wealth. Imagine what kind of pressure they'd be putting on the government right now to stop whatever that is that's
That's
happening.
true.
And so too with him.
That's true. That's a good point. And I've seen a lot of reports actually coming out of like people around him are even like, look, like we got to stop this, or like, what's your end goal here? Because it's unclear to me what his end goal is anyways. Like, is it to gather the Soviet Union back together? Do you want to be like a Lenin or a Stalin and be remembered for something like that? Like, what is your end goal here? I just don't know.
Yeah, this is more a question for my colleague James Harrigan
Of course.
than I, but I can hypothesize at least something, and that is that Ukraine was looking to become a member of NATO,
Mm-hmm.
and if Ukraine had been successful in becoming a member of NATO, you've got a large country right on your back doorstep. They share a border with Russia.
Right.
It's now NATO. And if you want to imagine what that looks like, go back in the United States to the days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when it was exactly this scenario, only played out in reverse. That the Russians established a satellite country 90 miles off the coast of Florida.
Yep.
And what did we do? We imposed sanctions and tried to push the Russians out of Cuba. It came very close to actually being the start of World War III. Thank God cooler heads prevailed. But in some sense, I'm not saying I agree with Putin, but I can see some motivation there that's analogous to the motivation in this country during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right. Yeah. That's it. Reminded me of that as well. I obviously don't remember that. I wasn't around, but hearing the other generations talk about it and knowing about it is it seems very similar. And honestly, thank God Ukraine wasn't in NATO, because if they were and Russia invaded, we would 100% be in World War III right now, because we would all have to defend them.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, I think there's a causality issue here, which is if they had been in NATO, I think Putin would have been far less likely to invade,
True. Okay.
knowing what our response would have been. So in a lot of ways, he was facing a game of, look, just allow them to become a member of NATO, in which case I can't invade them, or invade them now before they become a member of NATO, and hopefully prevent that from happening.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And um, so I know we froze a lot of the money. A lot UK is freezing all their money. It's how much of the world is relying on Russia, and how much is Russia relying on the world? Because I do see gas prices going up here. I know we get a lot of the crude oil from there. I think I just saw today it's like $140 a gallon right now.
Barrel,
Um,
yeah.
a barrel, sorry, yeah. What like are they self-reliant? I know Germany relies on Russia like 70%. So do you know a little bit about that or?
Yeah, let's see. I know a little bit. Russia's economy, we think of Russia as this big country.
Right.
Its economy is roughly the size of California's.
What?
So, yeah, I mean, not insignificant by any means, but it's not, anywhere on the scale of the US economy.
Wow.
Um, and it's, it's a major exporter of oil, as we discussed, other things, grain, wood,
Mhm.
these sorts of things. And whenever you have a situation like this, so Russia is now no longer exporting oil, and that's going to cause an increase in the price of oil. I don't think that's the major factor driving up the price of oil. I
Okay.
think it has an effect. It's not the major factor. I think there are two major factors, or well, let me go with one. There's one major factor, which is markets. Markets react to what they think the future holds.
Mm,
So anytime you have a situation of uncertainty, particularly when it involves military incursion, and much more so when it involves major world powers, there's a lot of uncertainty. And in exchange for this uncertainty, what happens is prices start to go up. People will start to invest in oil futures because they believe the price of oil will go up in the future. And their belief that the price of oil will go up in the future causes the price of oil to go up now because they're
wow.
buying up these things. So it becomes this kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy. So in some ways, it's simply reflecting the people's attitudes at the moment. Um, I think also this was coming. Maybe this was my second point. This was coming anyway. This being the rise in the price of gas, though maybe not to the extent we're seeing now. And it
Right.
was coming because of the inflation that we've been experiencing here in the US. We would expect the price of gas to go up along with the prices of other things. But let me put this in perspective. Price of gas as of today averages $4.07 in the United States. That's a gallon of regular on average. And I think that's the highest it's ever been, unless you adjust for inflation.
Hmm.
If you adjust for inflation, the price of gas in July of 2008 was over $5.15 a gallon. In 2012, it was up around $4.80 a gallon, adjusted for inflation. So yeah, the price of gas is particularly high right now, painfully high in a lot of people's cases, but it's not unprecedented. We've been here before. Actually, it's been worse than this before.
Right.
It'll come back down.
Yep.
I remember back in 2008, someone said to me the same thing you just said, Corey, about, oh my God, the price of oil is $142 a barrel. And the thought is it'll never come back down again.
Mm.
Well, it does. It dropped back down below $100 and stayed there for a decade before
Right.
we ended up back where we are.
Right. God, two things from that. One, I remember back in the day when it was under $1 and it was just like,
Great.
do you think we'll ever get to that again?
Under $1, I doubt. I doubt that. More so because of overall inflation.
Mm.
So even when it was under $1 back in the day, when I was in graduate school, it was like 99 cents.
Yep.
But if you adjust for inflation, that's more like $3 today, maybe.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
That's so fast. I just remember like growing up, it's like $1.15 or $1.10, not 99 cents. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of the things we get all bent out of shape in this country about, fossil fuels, and why is it that Americans won't drive electric cars?
Mhm.
And part of the reason we won't drive electric cars is because gas is so darn cheap.
Right.
And even at a couple bucks a gallon, even go to $3, $4 a gallon, it's still cheaper as a fraction of the average American's income than gas was in the 1950s.
With inflation and everything, that's
Yeah, with
yeah,
inflation and adjusting for the fact that we're earning more than we were
more
in the 1950s, so it's less costly to me.
right.
Let's say it this way: I have to work fewer hours to afford a gallon of gas today than my grandparents did in 1950, and that doesn't even account for the fact that my car today gets twice the gas mileage that they got in 1950.
That's very
So,
true.
and this is why you're seeing Americans not move away from fossil fuels. It's just so cheap.
Right. Wow, that's I love that perspective. Um, since we're on gasoline, I'll stick to these couple questions and I'll go back to China and Taiwan. I have a couple questions about that. Um, so a couple of questions that I got from people. One, I hear this all the freaking time, and I know you and James have told me this before, because there's certain things that the president just literally has absolutely nothing to do with. Like people blame the president for this, blame him for that. Does the president have anything to do with what you're paying at the pump?
No, not really. Not really. People love to lay blame or to congratulate the president when the stock market goes up and gas prices go down. The president doesn't have anything to do with that. First off, the only apart from doing something extreme like starting a war in the Middle East,
Right.
the president isn't going to have any effect here. The most effect you're going to see from Washington is going to come in two pieces. One is the federal gas tax, which is pretty low. It's 18 cents a gallon. State gas taxes generally are much higher than that. In Pennsylvania, we're like almost 60 cents a gallon state tax.
Damn.
So the federal gas tax, that's one thing that's going to come from Washington. The other thing that's going to come from Washington is that will affect the price of gas are environmental regulations.
Hmm.
So regulations that require that you use ethanol or the gas be cleaner, or you do something to your cars, this sort of thing. That's going to affect prices, and that's in part why you see the price of gas so high in California versus the rest of the country. California has more stringent
Hmm.
environmental regulations than the rest of us do.
Interesting. So the more stringent those regulations, the higher the gas prices will be versus some rural states that might not be the
Yeah,
case.
yeah, and about that, I want to say something good and something bad. On the one hand, um, environmental regulations that prevent people from imposing harm on others. So, if I've got a car that belches, lead lead laced fumes, I'm imposing harm on other people. And a regulation that prohibits lead based gas is actually a good thing there. So that's a good type of regulation, preventing people from imposing harm on others.
Hmm.
But then you get other regulations like the ethanol requirements that gas has to contain at least whatever it is, 10% ethanol or something.
Right.
And and the argument is, or the original argument was that, well, this is better for the environment because ethanol is a renewable resource and oil isn't. Yeah, except there's been a lot of studies done on this since then, and it turns out that ethanol is actually worse for the environment.
Hmm.
Not in so much as it's ethanol, but that it requires more energy to produce it than what it's worth. So actually, in terms of using and what kind of energy do you use to produce ethanol from corn? You use fossil fuels. So we're actually using more fossil fuels to produce the ethanol than what we'd be consuming if we just got rid of the ethanol and put the fossil fuels directly into our gas tanks.
Right.
So that's one thing. And the ethanol requirements persist. They came into effect when I was, good Lord, like in high school. So they've been around for like 30 years or
Wow.
plus. The reason they persist is because they become a cash cow for farmers,
Right.
farmers who grow corn, right? Because all of a sudden there's this guaranteed market for your corn now because of the ethanol, because it's required in the gas tanks,
Right.
and the farmers then are going to support the politicians who are in favor of ethanol. So all of a sudden now the politicians can make some hay with ethanol. And this is an example of a bad regulation. It's a regulation that's imposing costs not because it's preventing people from imposing harm on each other, but just because somebody's making some economic profit out of this.
Right. Okay. That's a good way to put it. So why don't we just go nuclear? I know we had a couple spills
Yeah.
throughout the world, but isn't it more efficient? Isn't it cleaner? It's just a scary thing, right?
Yeah, my understanding, and again, this is my understanding, so take it for what it's worth, is that nuclear is, yeah, it's not riskless, but that's the wrong question. There
Mm,
is no riskless energy source. The right
true.
question is, how risky is it compared to alternatives? And people say, well, you have a meltdown and something like happened in Fukushima. Yeah, that can happen from time to time. Evidence suggests it happens very infrequently. In fact, evidence suggests it happens far less frequently than oil tankers spilling their loads and polluting the environment. And
That's
so
true.
now you've got this trade-off here. So I think, particularly since Americans have been out of the nuclear business for 30 some years,
Yep.
maybe more. And while we've been out of the nuclear business, the rest of the world has figured out how to do it much more safely than it was done in the past. And I think a lot of the problems that we have today with fossil fuels are a direct result of environmentalists.
Hmm.
That is, the environmentalists of 30, 40 years ago put a stop to nuclear. And in putting a stop to nuclear in this country, it forced us down the path of fossil fuel. And now we have greenhouse problems, and the environmentalists saying, well, we need to care more about the environment. Why are we emitting all this greenhouse gas? To
Right.
which I say, hang on, it's because of you, the environmentalist.
No, that's so true. I have noticed it's funny you put it that way of like we stop with nuclear, but the rest of the world just figured a much safer way to do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to take us a long time if we ever get to that. I don't even know if we ever would, but I see a lot of other countries using nuclear, and it's they're doing very well with it. So
Yeah. I think France, for example, generates 70% of its power by
that's
nuclear. Um,
crazy.
what interests me is, and you keep seeing news about this, advances in fusion.
Right.
And fusion doesn't produce first off, it produces more power than nuclear fission, but it does not produce the radioactive waste that nuclear fission produces.
Wow.
So when fusion finally becomes commercially viable, I think that's going to replace everything.
Really?
Yeah.
What does that world look like?
That world looks like, zero gas emissions,
Wow.
everything running on electric. It's also interestingly going to dramatically alter places like the Sahara, places like the Los Angeles area, places like the Middle East, where water is particularly scarce. With fusion power, you can desalinate at very low cost, and you'll have
Wow.
all the fresh water you want.
Damn. Why are we doing that right now?
Well, it's a technological thing. At the moment,
Okay.
the science just isn't that advanced. Now, I say isn't that advanced. It's getting to the point now where scientists are able to sustain fusion reactions in the laboratory, which is the first step to, they can make it work.
Yeah.
Now, can you make it work at a commercially viable
Yeah.
price? That's
Scaling
step number
that.
two.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's going to be all right. Well, hopefully in our lifetime.
Hopefully, although interestingly, there will be possibly a new environmental question arise, and that is, what do we do about the trees? Because if you're going to be producing all of this power like we're describing,
Mhm.
it's got to be transmitted over power lines, which means all of a sudden we're going to have to be cutting down lots of trees to run these power lines that we currently don't have,
Right.
unless you're going to do something like put a fusion reactor in every neighborhood. And I don't know, because again, once the technology emerges, the technology may actually emerge down that path, but
Right.
I don't know. We'll wait and see.
I have a bunch of holsters from Bravo, and one of them is the inside the waistband holster. So this goes inside the waistband if you want to conceal carry. Also, swap it out here, outside the waistband. So this outside the waistband is actually like hella thin, and you can see kind of like how close to the body it can get. You could take this on the range. you can probably conceal this and comfortably do it with, a hoodie over top or whatever. If you want to open carry, it's up to you. They also send out mag pouches, right? So you can throw in an extra mag. You're going to the range. You don't have to unload and reload every single time. You got a little hollow point moment. They come in handy if you're on the range, like I said, or if you can still carry and you're one of those people that are gotta have a lot of mags or whatever. Whatever your cup of tea is. They also send you these really cool pamphlets. They go into great details in these brochures of how to wear things properly, safety mechanisms, and all the features that all of these holsters have as well. So they really focus on educating their customers, which when it comes to guns, safety and education are number one. They don't have any left-handed holsters except for the Glock 19. I'm a lefty, but the right-handed holsters are so dope and they're so comfortable and concealable that I don't really give a shit. Just learn how to shoot with my right hand. And right now they're doing a buy one, get one free, plus free shipping, the 30-day money-back guarantee, and a lifetime warranty. On top of that, you, my friends, will get 10% off of any product, of any purchase on their website by using Explicit 10. Use the code Explicit 10 and you'll get 10% off your entire purchase from bravoconcealment.com. I wonder if, because I know there's a lot, like out here in Colorado, a lot of the power lines are actually under the ground to preserve the views. I wonder if that would be a possibility.
Maybe so. Maybe
Gotta
so.
hit up
Who knows?
Elon Musk or something.
Who knows? But again, it's an interesting thing. All kinds of things become possible that aren't possible now when energy becomes basically free,
Right.
which is what it's going to be with fusion.
Right. That would be nice if energy was free. No more bills, no more electric bills. Will we still have to pay bills?
Well, yeah, I think what it'll look like, it'll look a lot like what happened with our cell phones and texting. When texting first evolved, you had to pay per text.
Yep. Oh my God.
To send the thing. And now you don't. It's you buy a phone, you have a monthly subscription to your phone, you can send as many texts as you want. And I think that's what it's going to be. You'll get a monthly subscription to your power company and just use as much power as you want.
That's incredible. Well, hopefully that happens soon, because that would be a fun world to live in. Okay, so back to the president issue, not issue, but kind of thing. One is, what would you tell someone that keeps blaming the president for gas prices? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but is there something like an analogy or some dumbing down version of something like that you can compare, like why they shouldn't be blaming the president for these things? Because the administration's kind of like, and you and James have talked about this, like almost every 4 years, one out, one in, and it's like new policy, and they're trying to like remove what other people have done. And I always hear people like Trump supporters, oh, gas prices were never, this high, and you go back to Obama, like you said, in 2008, and Bush too, they were rising because of the war. So there's a lot of things that go into that. But I'm like, I just want to tell, like, what can I tell someone when next time I hear someone say this? What can I tell them in a sentence or two to just be like, make them think differently, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I would try this. Prices are determined by demand and supply. People who want the thing and people who are able to produce the thing.
Right.
The government's involvement pretty much stays constricted to setting the rules of the exchange. And to the extent those rules are clear and minimal, the exchanges happen easily. To the extent that the rules are cumbersome, complex, it makes it harder for the exchanges to occur.
Right.
And the prices are reflecting mostly what those rules, let's say, to the extent that the prices reflect what's going on in the government, it's reflecting the rules the government has set down. And those rules don't come from the president. They come from Congress. Well, and Congress will pass laws that get signed by the president, but it happens over a long period of time. So much so that if there is indeed anything going on in the economy that is to be blamed on a president, more often than not, it's to be blamed on the president who came before, because it takes years for the policies to take effect and for that to play out in the marketplace and you to get the changes in the price. I would say I would say if I were to point to one thing today that can be one thing that's going on in markets that can be immediately attributable to the sitting president and the sitting Congress, it's inflation.
Hmm.
And that is every time Congress passes and the president signs a budget deficit that comes back to us anymore dressed up as printed money to pay for that deficit, and that printed money gives us inflation. So when you see the price of groceries going up to an extent, when you see the price of gas going up, other sorts of things, you can blame the president and the Congress, and it isn't simply Biden. It's Biden plus Trump plus Obama plus and ...
Right. Okay, yeah, you said something earlier, like the which I never thought of, like when the gas prices and stuff go, or any price goes up, like these are kind of like predictions of like the market reflecting on what they think is going to happen.
Right.
So that's a good insight, because I think a lot of people are so stuck in like, oh, this is happening right now, versus like, well, no, this is the market reacting to a potential maybe world war that they're anticipating. So they're going to jack up everything, and eventually it will go down. But I like that way of thinking of, it's more of a prediction than it is like a sure thing.
Yes,
If that makes sense.
absolutely.
Okay.
And it reflects not just the prediction, but also the uncertainty to the
Okay.
extent it could be the case that half the people think there's going to be a world war and half the people think it's going to be peace and strawberries.
Right.
The mere fact of the disagreement, the uncertainty, is going to cause the price to go up.
That's a great point. Okay, so let me ask you: is war good or bad for business? I know a lot of military companies and contractors, and they make war is extremely profitable for a lot of companies. Is it good or bad for business?
It's like war is a lot like ethanol in that way.
Okay.
It's good for some, but it's bad for people in general.
Right.
So, it's good for the Raytheons, it's good for Boeing, it's good for, the companies that provide supplies to the military.
Right.
It's bad for the rest of us. And the extent to which it's bad for the rest of us exceeds the extent to which it's good for those for whom it is good.
Right.
So in total, it's bad for us in the aggregate.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. Also, having going through wars now, it's just been like, Jesus, man, like, can't we just like fight our own fights and just leave people alone at this point? Because I mean, it's done so much to us. I mean, this generation has seen so much. I mean, 18, you're sending kids over there in 2000. You know what I mean? It's just
Yeah, but there's an interesting thing. Your word choice is interesting. This generation has seen so much. I agree with you. It has seen so much, not because there was so much to see, but because our ability to see was much higher.
Okay.
We have, everybody's got the cell phone, so they can record what's going on.
True.
It goes out to everybody else. But if you look at the numbers, the number of people who are killed in wars, not just the military, but civilians also, number of human beings who are killed in wars is down 95%.
Of course. Yeah.
From several generations ago. This is despite what you're seeing in Ukraine, you see elsewhere, it's not perfect, but in a lot of ways, this is the most peaceful humans have ever been since the dawn of time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I actually tell people all the time when I hear them say, "Oh, this is the worst time to be alive." I'm like, actually, this is like the most safest. This is probably the best time to be alive, actually, because imagine if our grandparents in World War II had cell phones. I mean, Jesus, like that's where you're exactly right. Like the casualties and stuff like that. Yeah, that's actually a good point. So, damn, completely just took my.
But this is the thing that I think people today need to be very careful about.
Okay.
We have this tendency to see stuff on social media and think that what we're seeing is a correct representation of the world.
Right.
What you're seeing at best is a correct representation of a particular thing that's happening.
Right.
It's not, you're not seeing everything else. I give you a good example. A friend of mine says, you never see on the news 186,000 planes landed in the US today without any loss of life, right? And yet if we reported in a completely unbiased way, you would hear that report night after night on the evening news. Right. And once in a while you'd hear, oh, one person died.
Right.
But instead, what happens is when the one person dies, that's what gets repeated. And you hear it on and on. The talking heads talk about it. And what are we going to do about people dying from airplane crashes? When airplane crashes are so incredibly rare, but you don't know that because we only report the deaths. We don't report the non-deaths.
Right. That's so funny you brought that up because I have a tremendous fear of flying. Um, and I travel all the time. So it sucks. I'm having to drink like a glass of whiskey before I get on the plane. And sometimes it's funny because it'll be like 5 o'clock in the morning and I'm asking for a whiskey. And these people around me are like,
Right.
you got a problem? I'm like, no, I have an anxiety problem. For me, it's a control thing. I think it's like I drive everywhere. So I know like I'm good, even though I know the statistics are I could get killed in a car accident a million times more than I would die in a plane crash. But it's funny because that's what I hate. And I think that's what happens. That's why I've generated this anxiety with flying is because when you do hear about those things, that's all you hear. I didn't know that 100,000 planes land every day. Like that would make me feel good
Yeah.
and
Right.
safe to
Right.
fly, but that doesn't sell.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
It doesn't sell.
Right. You made a good point last time I talked to you about like, um, you told people to not listen and watch, obviously don't believe everything you see on social media because those algorithms are putting stuff in front of you that, is not always accurate or happening. I know there just recently, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, there was a huge article going around because he had like a vest on and like all the stuff. And it was this photo of him, like kind of like on the front lines. And people were promoting it like, oh, he's on the, they were shitting on Biden. They were like, oh, this guy is front lines. This photo was from like last year. It wasn't
Right.
current, but no one was reading the article. They were just commenting and sharing. So it went viral, which is it's a good thing. Like he's definitely kudos to him. He's a fantastic president. He's doing what he can. But it was just funny because I'm like, damn, like if you actually read the article, it literally says this photo is from last year. So it's just they're using it as almost clickbait to make you think something. And that's what scares me the most about this particular conflict because I don't know what's really happening. I don't know what's true. I don't know what's false. I mean, I'm hearing reports of, Russia saying, "Oh, we're not doing anything with civilians," and then I see a woman get ran over in her car by a tank, and I'm like, "Am I seeing this because the algorithm is this Is this even true? Is this real?" So,
Right.
what are your thoughts on social media? When it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think there's a lot less lying on social media. The photoshopping
Right.
of
Right.
pictures or adjusting the video or whatever it is. I think, yeah, not to say there isn't any, but I think there's a lot less of that, and that doesn't bother me.
Okay.
What bothers me that there's a lot of is people showing things that are true, but they're only part of the truth.
Uh,
And so you see this thing and you say, well, I should believe that because it's true. Yes, you should believe it. It is true. But people go a step further and they don't believe the things they aren't seeing. But the things they aren't seeing are also true.
right.
Like, all right, this woman got run over by the tank, but here's 3 million women who didn't.
Right.
We don't see that. We just see the one. And
Right.
so we fixate, we walk away with it has the same effect as lying without lying.
Right.
Maybe you call it a lie by omission rather
Right.
than a lie by commission.
Right. No, I love that. I've seen examples of that in the media where they show a photo of one angle, and let's say it's like a cop
Right.
looking like he's like hitting this person, and then you move the angle, and he's actually like assisting them and helping them, but
Right.
that's
Right.
the angle that the news decided to use
Right.
because it fit their what they wanted to push.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's truthful. It may be truthful, but it's not the full truth, because and then I see reports of Russians not wanting to fight. The soldiers on the ground are going into Ukrainian homes asking for food, and the Ukrainians are helping them. And it's just like I'm seeing reports of them damaging their tanks so they can't make it into Kyiv. It's just like Jesus Christ, man. Like it's like I don't know what to believe. And it's funny, man, because it's like America's like on this island. We're just kind of like chilling. We don't really have any conflict. And you got Ukraine. That's just like people are trying to flee their country so they don't get killed. I don't know.
Well,
It's
yeah.
interesting.
And as you talk about that, it reminds me of something interesting I've been noticing. Um, and that is, unlike with other wars, it seems to be the case that people aren't mad at the Russians.
Hmm.
Think about World War II. It was the Germans, and the
Yeah, yeah,
Germans were doing this horrible thing.
sure.
But it seems to be the case that people aren't directing their anger at the Russian people. It's specifically Putin.
Yep.
And what that tells me, that I think is excellent news on a number of fronts, but one of them is good news for the aftermath. Because when this is all over, there's not going to be some sense of we have to exact retribution from the Russian people, because it's not the Russian people, it's Putin. And I
Right.
think we understand that, at least for the moment.
Right. That's a great point, because there's a huge difference from like the Germans and the Holocaust. Even today, when someone says they're German, if I meet them, immediately my brain goes to the Holocaust and Hitler. And I wasn't even around for that stuff. But that's, I think, because like you're saying, the aftermath of that is every German was blank, pick up
Right.
nasty
Yeah.
name, because they all somewhat had a hand in what happened. But I think that's a great point, because I'm seeing the same thing where actual Russians, like people are actually praying for Russians. Like they're not like, oh, these are terrible people. Like they don't, because Ukrainians and Russians are so close as people
Right.
anyway. So
Yes.
it's like, there's like they're fighting themselves. But I agree with you. I'm seeing everything basically pointed to the Kremlin and to pointing to Putin and what he is doing. That's a great point. And it sucks, because like we talked about earlier, like the economics of it, the hardships that's going to happen is like Putin's worth $60 billion. Like he's never going to have to fight for anything, but his people are really suffering. And it's kind of like, when do we all kind of step in? And I was going to say this earlier, but it's this, what is unprecedented to me is the amount of like the world that's coming together that is all anti-Putin now. I mean, not that they weren't
Yeah.
before, but now it's extremely clear where everyone stands with not Russia, to your point, but to Putin, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's great. All of this indicates to me that humans have become much more, we've grown up. We've become
Right.
much more mature where dealing with these conflicts is concerned.
Right. No, I agree. And honestly, like when it was kind of the timing thing. Like China's like, hey, can you wait till the Olympics are done and then do your thing? Because we need the
Right.
viewers. But it's funny because when I said earlier, like social media was worrying me, because that's all it takes. I think World War I was started because some person got shot on a bridge. It was like an accident, miscommunication. World War II, we kind of, inserted ourselves because we needed to handle business. But like I was worried like something was going to happen on social media that was going to trigger something that wasn't true or wasn't all the way true. But I think your point of like us growing up, I've seen that across the board. It seems like everybody is on the same page when it comes to what the hell is happening with this invasion. That, to your point, the aftermath is not going to be on Russia. It's going to be on Putin. What do you think is going to happen to him? Do you think that he's going to be pushed out? I mean, can he even be pushed out?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happens next. That goes beyond my expertise.
Right.
But I think one thing that interested me, and what I'm about to say might be, I'm fully prepared that this was simply coincidence.
Okay.
However, I find it interesting to think about, and that is that the whole concern about COVID in this country pretty much died out at the same time that the problems with Ukraine began. And again, that might simply be coincidence, but I'm wondering how much of that was possibly due to the media changing its attention. That we were concerned about COVID, not to say we shouldn't be concerned about COVID, but I think we were more concerned than we needed to be, precisely because the media was showing us, problems of COVID 24/7, month after month. And now all of a sudden the media's found this new shiny thing that's horrible they can talk about, and is going to go talk about that. Stop talking about COVID, and we say, yeah, you know what? We don't need these masks anymore. Let's just go back to life as usual.
Anthony, I wrote that down about COVID-19 because I wanted to kind of touch on that. You're 100% right. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that's exactly what happened. In my opinion, is they have this new shiny toy with Russia and Ukraine, death, war, potential craziness versus this little COVID thing that's kind of run its course in the
Mhm.
media. And it was funny. I was just in San Diego for a conference, and in California, which typically, I mean, literally like weeks ago, they just allowed you don't have to wear masks in a restaurant. Um, so they're like the furthest behind every basically state. And it's funny because while I was there, I was like, as this Ukrainian stuff was happening, it was like I felt a shift and us
Mm.
not giving a fuck, basically.
Right,
Like it
right.
was like,
Yeah.
oh, COVID schmovid. It was like, oh, it's kind of over. They started to really loosen things up within days of this happening. And I think you're exactly right. It's majority because the news isn't bombarding us every day with deaths. And honestly, I've seen nothing but positive things about COVID in the news recently, of deaths going down, infection rates going down. There's not a new variant
Right,
conveniently. It's because it's probably not going to sell like a video of a woman getting ran over by a tank would,
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
and it's sad, but honestly, it's like, all right, well, I'm kind of relieved because I'm not even going to get my booster now, because I
Mm.
felt almost like the media was like, get your booster, and I'm like, I'm good now. I travel all the time. I haven't gotten it yet. And I'm lucky enough to, obviously knock on wood, be healthy, but it's just like, and obviously people aren't always that lucky, but you couldn't be more right. I think that's exactly what happened. This is a new shiny toy, and COVID's not sexy anymore.
Right.
So,
And I hope that one of the things that happens here is that people, we viewers, grow up a bit. Um, we've When we're children and we see the tabloids in the grocery store, we we don't distinguish between the tabloid and the newspaper. We think that this is all news, and it requires a growing up and a level of maturity to realize, no, they're just trying to sell these papers. None of that
right.
is true. And I think we need the same level of maturity when it comes to dealing with social media, with the media, just to take a deep breath and say, okay, well, wait a minute, they're not lying, but it's not the whole truth, and I don't need to wig out about this thing until I
Right.
find out what the whole story is.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's funny you bring up tabloids because, um, as a kid, yeah, but like even as like a teenager, as you get older and you're going through the grocery line and you see all these ridiculous, like, Oprah's an alien and all this crazy stuff, it's like you immediately know that that's not true. Social
Right.
media is so much harder to decipher, because you have live commentary, you have things. I mean, most people don't even read the actual articles that they're commenting on. They just go off of the clickbait and the tagline. I wish Facebook and social media platforms had that tabloid thing where it's like, no, this is actually, we're just trying to sell this story or this read
Right.
or
Right.
whatever. But that's so funny you bring that up, because you're right. Because when you look at those in a grocery store, they're funny to me now as an adult. They're hilarious. It's
Right.
like it's funny because it's like, this is not true. 100%. There's no
Right.
truth in this at all.
Right.
But
But as a kid, I was, oh my God,
oh
look at
yeah,
that. Why is
no,
nobody talking about this thing?
literally, it's so funny. The TV guides, all this. Yeah, it's like those tabloids are so funny. And as a kid, same thing. I'm like, oh my God, alien invasion. This is crazy. Guys, are you
Yeah.
ready? It's like, this
Yeah.
is not true. I just wish social media had that. But I agree with you. I think we're getting to a point of maturity where we can kind of decipher uh, what's actually valid and real. That is actually also what's more important to me is, how is this going to affect me and my family and me in my life, right?
Mhm.
Something you and James always told me is like, the government is made to be inefficient.
Mhm.
I kind of apply that to a lot of things now in my life, actually, because not to make myself inefficient, but like, if it doesn't directly affect me, then I can't make a direct effect on it. I kind of just put it by the wayside, where I used to just think everything I read or I see, oh my God, this is gonna, this new gun law is gonna take away my gun, or this, or it's gonna take away that. And that's not the case.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that's wise. By and large, things are innocuous. You know,
yeah,
I, I think I think what happens is society, the government, it responds to the people, and
right.
to the extent that people think that something is reasonable, the government will move in that direction.
Right. I agree with
And to
you.
the extent that people want something that's unreasonable, the government will move in that direction also. So
Right.
in a lot of ways, we talked, you were talking about how much can we blame on Biden versus Obama versus Trump. In a lot of ways, the people who we really should be blaming are ourselves.
Right. Ooh.
So when a politician puts us in a position of having, significant inflation because of deficits, and deficits are because of providing free stuff like college education. Well, why are they providing free college education? Because we asked for it.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Look in the mirror, people. This is your
Yeah, very
fault.
much so. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm gonna circle back to the question I was going to ask earlier. I've always thought so. It's not everyone, but most people know China has always wanted to bring, Taiwan. They want Taiwan. They've been very vocal about that. Just recently, actually, yesterday, I read a report that China and Taiwan are talking in peace and everything is happy go lucky. Two things, two-part question. One, are you worried about China into Taiwan and possibly Iran into Israel and North Korea into South Korea because of what Russia's doing? But really, do you think that China is kind of sitting back and watching Russia, being like, okay, these are the mistakes you made. This is what you did right, before they go on and do it? Because to your point, there's some of these countries that are not in NATO that they can invade without any repercussions from other allied countries, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I would have felt a lot differently if Putin had been successful, if he
Hmm.
had been able to overrun Ukraine in a couple of days, and before anybody could respond,
Right.
it's a done deal. I would have been much more concerned about Taiwan in that instance.
Okay.
Much less so now. What are the Chinese seeing? They're seeing um, Putin attempted this takeover. He was unsuccessful, and more than that, the entire world united against him in this unique way of imposing economic and financial sanctions. And so I think the Chinese will. I think the Chinese are less likely to attempt something with Taiwan, given what's happened with Ukraine. That's
Right.
my armchair theory.
No, that's a great point, actually, because that makes sense. Because China is very, they're always concerned and worried about what I think the world thinks about them, for sure, because they want to be looked at as this huge superpower and all this stuff. It's like that. Like right now, Putin looks like a complete idiot, to be honest with you, because
Yeah.
he tried to invade a country that he thought he was going to steamroll. It's been completely unsuccessful. Yes, they're making, you know, more they're pushing further in for sure, but it's not as easy as he thought it would be. And that's a great point, actually, to think of, kind of like, rest assured that, like, China's looking at this saying, like, okay, maybe this isn't a good idea because of the potential unsuccessful uh possibility of that happening to Taiwan. But it's interesting perspective. I like that. That's good. Let's see here. So those are actually all the questions I have. But do you have anything that you would like to talk about, that I could drop some knowledge on? I'm just joking. I have literally nothing good to say. Um, but yeah, is there anything else that you would like to kind of cover or anything like that?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else interesting to say. This is I mean, to the extent that what I did say was interesting, I don't know.
Oh no, it was interesting, and a lot of these clips are going to do very well on TikTok. I promise you that. Um, Well, then I'll leave it at that. But Anthony, once again, thank you so much for coming on, and kind of that's why I like talking to people like you as well, because you look at things so differently, not just like in an emotional way, because a lot of people nowadays are so emotional with their decision making and their thinking. You kind of bring me and my listeners and watchers down to like a perspective that's like more logical, I think. So I really appreciate that.
My pleasure, Corey. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Where can people find you, Anthony? And you can plug your books and your podcast and all that stuff.
You could find our podcast, Words and Numbers, on all the podcast players. And if you want to read more about our thoughts, mine and James Harrigan's, on stuff like this, you can read our book, Cooperation and Coercion, which is available on Amazon and Audible.
It is. Yes. And I will put all the links in the description below. But Anthony, once again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Corey.
That's another episode for the E4 Explicit podcast. We'll see you next time. Peace out.